Mike, there was a question earlier about targeting, invasive instance targeting. I mean, we all know that the more somebody knows about us, the better in some abstract sense they can bring value to us. But when most people understand how targeting works in the ad industry, they get a little spooked. So can you sort of give the super mini primer and on sort of what's actually going on and what's happening in the industry around it?
Sure. I think the headline is, how many of you work for an ad agency or a network or in marketing for a brand? Okay, so I guess what I always say when folks get paranoid, for lack of a better term, is I really appreciate how much credit you're giving all of us. Because all the theories around being able to raise your health insurance rates because you bought a turkey fryer and you like these alcohol brands and all these disparate data points that absolutely can be collected on you. Does anybody really know how advertising is bought and sold? Once you do, you realize that stuff is entirely irrelevant, and it's essentially it's the province of people who are borderline paranoid or who love the technology too much because it's too complex. So the challenge is the data that's being collected on you is almost entirely anonymous, almost entirely harmless. The challenge is not whether or not it should be collected on an opt-in or opt-out basis, because short of very sensitive things like your prescriptions and your financial data, the data that's coursing around there is for the most part harmless. The challenge is you need to know what's happening and have the ability to opt yourself out of it if it makes you uncomfortable. And that's the challenge. I think that it gets stirred up. I'm in Washington a lot, and you go and you sit down with members of Congress and they use that same analogy, like, you can raise my constituents' insurance rates because they bought a deep turkey fryer. And you're like, true, but do you know what the cost of of targeting that customer is, just relative to if you're an insurance company just blasting out with more simple structured data around common sense variables is? And then of course they say, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. And the point is the economics don't work there for really invasive, sinister targeting. And that's part of our challenge, which is explaining to consumers what's happening, but also getting them to understand, and the industry to understand, that all the sinister targeting, the economics are really quite bad.
So that's an interesting point. I mean, what you're basically saying is, yes, data is in theory available, and in theory is aggregatable. And by the way, probably a number of the industry players are aggregating and correlating in ways that are not necessarily great, partly for ignorance,
that's true,
as opposed to by design. But in the end, does it actually matter? What is it that moves the needle? And so that's a big question. I mean, one aspect, of course, is what a marketer knows about us. Another aspect, obviously, the context of what we're doing. I mean, Google's a great example. When I'm searching for something, I'm signaling intent loud and clear. And for a long time, Google's technology actually knew essentially nothing about me. It was purely based on the context of what I'm doing and how people who search for the similar things click. Ron, do you sort of have a thought from your view as a publisher and now as a marketer on the trade-off between knowledge about the user versus knowledge about what the user is doing independently of who they are?
Yeah, I would say that we saw this in the publishing world. We were very narrow in that we covered, we talked about soccer. And when we were able to integrate in an advertiser into the content, the results were fantastic. We was telling somebody this before, we did a bunch of work with Castrol Motor Oil, and they want to be associated with football. So the way that we did that is we created something called the Castrol Performance Index that measured statistically how a player did, and then ranked players. So you could say the player of the match was this guy because he had a 73.7 score on the CPI. And by doing that and integrating that into the content, we were able to raise the brand awareness of Castrol within football, from something like 20% to 80 or 90%. However, when you ran Castrol Motor Oil ads, right, on the site, no one clicked on it, right? Because seeing an ad for motor oil was just completely irrelevant to the experience that I had, which was reading about a football game. So we found, but when you integrated it in, it just, you ask anybody about it, they went right to it. Unfortunately, that's not a real extensible model, but it is what worked, and it kind of goes to the point of it's a lot like Google search, right? It's just integrated naturally into the experience to why I'm there. to what I'm doing. You're not interrupting me, right? You're not asking me to stop doing what I'm doing and go look and do something else. It's a natural flow of the process that I'm in, the information I'm seeking.
Well, traditional ads in some ways are interruptive, but there's a wide variety in quality of experience that an ad creates. And in some sense, when iAd shipped, it was sort of really showed a completely new way to experience an ad. So Lars, you helped create that. Kind of share your thoughts. Help us, to the extent you can, kind of understand why did Apple approach this. And to Ron's question, yeah, sure, it's cool, but can it work at scale?
Yeah, so the first question on why did Apple approach this is really the simple statement was to make more money for their developers, which would encourage a richer ecosystem of developers, and it all goes down the chain in terms of promoting people using the devices, and it becomes a way really to help Apple across a variety of initiatives. So that was kind of the simple mandate as to why they went after an ad network in the first place. A couple interesting points on the data side. I think one of the biggest things that iAd has done is create a relevant set of data for advertisers to use that really does work. So we've seen lots of different types of data, and some of it works well and some of it doesn't. Some of it is more just ways for networks and others to try to fill line items and say we're really going to get you a targeted user, but it doesn't actually move yield or it doesn't really optimize that well. And so one of the things that was exciting for us as Quattro coming into Apple was being able to leverage their rich data sets on the iTunes side of the house. So we were able to take really a whole new paradigm for targeting on the ad side and tap into all the various points of iTunes, all the different, we call them passion points, but we could look at music preferences, television shows, app channels, and then combine that with all the other standard stuff like location and device and speed and all sorts of different things that are more base level. So what was exciting to see there is it really did work. It really did provide lift, and it really was something where you saw good data directly helping corresponding to good yields and good engagement rates. So just a quick comment on data on the iAds side of things that I thought was pretty exciting. And then the other piece was probably the biggest piece that got a lot of attention was the creative quality of iAds. So Steve Jobs came out and talked a lot about how he thought advertising was terrible to date, and he really wanted to create a new standard and a new quality, and that's something that we did. And at first, it was hard to scale because we were really taking a lot of time to build these ads. They were pretty expensive. We had to do a lot of collaboration with the agencies and the buyers, but over time, that process has become much more efficient, and you've seen a lot more ads go out, and you've seen some sort of tweaks and flexibility with some other things around it in terms of pricing, but in general, the model has just gotten more efficient and actually does work pretty well and does scale. But we're not trying to do, to Ron's point, we're not trying to do product integrations, and or Apple's not trying to do that. We weren't at iAd. We were more trying to take the standard way of serving an ad and just make it a better creative with better targeting, and really have a better experience for the user.
Mm-hmm. Scott, Lars mentioned that part of the kind of engine inside iAd is the data they have, and obviously that data is acquired on an opt-in basis. You have an Apple account. Mobile in some sense has a lot more and a lot scarier data. Location information, which if you read the research sort of says that people can figure out a lot about you if they get you the location info. Can you give us a sense of how is the ad industry looking at data in mobile differently or the same than data online?
So mobile's at a very interesting inflection point because it's starting to become as an ad spend big enough to matter. And part of the reason that the privacy issues on the display, the desktop display issue exploded 4 or 5 years ago was because it finally became a market in the US that was big enough that it really mattered. You're talking about 10 billion in display. That's when Google bought DoubleClick. That's when Microsoft bought Quantum and Atlas. The decision of Apple to buy Quattro, AdMob getting bought by Google. So we're now at that inflection point. The big challenges in mobile are that you could actually make the argument right now that for any app-based advertising, it's already opt-in because you have to go through the act of downloading it. And I think that there's three big challenges that we have to tackle in the mobile space. The first one is making sure that when a consumer downloads that app for the first time or activates it for the first time, that they actually know what's happening and that the disclosures are clear and in English. We fight a constant battle between lawyers and marketers. The marketers want to tell you all the stuff about why it's so awesome, and the lawyers want to lawyer it, and somewhere in the middle is the right answer. So that's the first one. The second one is how does a consumer have control when they change their mind? Right? So you may download the weather.com app, and it's tracking me, but I may have been somewhere that I don't want anybody to know about, and I keep getting ads for Las Vegas. Because maybe I decided to change planes in Vegas and take an extra day or so there and not tell anybody. How do I control that? So one is how I opting in, the second is how do I have control? And then the third one, which is very interesting, and I think it's early days still, is on the web, everything is cookie-based. On your mobile device, you've got the app-based ads, and then you've got your, WAP is still a huge platform. And most of the dollars, I would say, right, most of the dollars in terms of online app is shifting. There's still a lot of money, a lot there in the WAP space. So you can set a cookie off of someone's app behavior and then be targeting ads to them on a WAP basis. And what are the forms of the controls? So those are the three things that everyone's really working on. We don't have perfect solutions, but we're working on things right now at Evidon with Millennial and JumpTap and others to try to solve it.
So communication and transparency, controls, and how do you handle identity, and
exactly.
Does identity leak all over the place?